Over my first 3 days of trading, I'm beating the market by over 1%. Follow along as I show you exactly how I did it and what my next moves are. Welcome to Momentum Trade Diaries, where I document real swing and momentum trades and share everything I learn along the way. I invested just over 10% of my portfolio's available cash since my last video. The portfolio is currently sitting at 82% cash, 10% focused ETFs, 5% individual stocks, and 3% market index ETFs. First, let's go over what I bought. Then I'll show you the new price alerts on the watch list and discuss my reasoning behind the changes. Last, I'll show you my first closed trade. You'll see how that affects my realized gains and losses and how the portfolio compares to the S&P 500 over the same period. All of my purchases since my last video were based on support levels. I use a limit of approximately 1% of total portfolio value for support level purchases. I've highlighted the purchases in this trade history tab so you can follow along as I discuss. First purchase is SPY for the S&P 500 ETF. Purchased one share at $662.09. This was based on support level around $663. Here's the chart. The next purchase was GLD for the gold shares ETF. I purchased 2 shares at $377.77 based on a bounce above the 20-day moving average, outperforming the SPY on the relative strength chart above the 20-day moving average of that chart, and a break above the 20-day moving average of the RSI. I also updated the alerts to a stop loss level and initial target gain. The next purchase was MAGS, M-A-G-S. This is the Magnificent 7 ETF. I purchased 8 shares at $63.03 based on support level around 63. Take a look at the chart. We can see that support at 63. Next purchase was SMH, or Semiconductors ETF. I purchased 2 shares at $333.35 based on support around $333.33. Take a look at that chart. We can see that 333 level as potential support. Next is SVXY, or the inverse of VIX volatility index. Purchased 11 shares at $46.26 based on support around $46. So if we take a look at that chart, we can see the support is right around 46. Next is XHB, which is the sector ETF for home builders. Purchased 5 shares at $103.03. And if we jump over to their chart, we can see I was looking at the support level right around 103 as we saw a high here and a couple of lows around that support, as well as the 200-day moving average. So since that time, it's dropped below the 200-day moving average, and I've updated the support level price alert right around just under $98. So if it falls to that level, then I'll buy a little bit more at that level. Okay, the next support level purchase was XLF, and I purchased 10 shares at $52 based on the support around $52. So we take a look at that. We can see here 52 was the expected support line, and it's broken down below that. So I've updated the price alert for a new potential support level that I'll talk about later in the video. The next purchase I made was Microsoft, MSFT, one share at $493.35. If we pull up that chart, you can see that the support was right around these two lows. And since then, it's fallen below that support level. And so I've updated the price alert for the next level of potential support, right above the 200-day moving average. We'll talk more about that later. And finally, I purchased 2 shares of Visa at $327 based on support at 327. So if we take a look at their chart, we can see at the time that the purchase was made, it touched that 327 level and actually just kept going down. So I've updated the price alert for a purchase in the future. If it touches three, well, we'll talk about that level a little bit later in the video. So I will hold the support buys until the price of the security crosses above the 20-day moving average. And at that point, I will use a break below the 20-day moving average as the sell signal. For breakout buys, I'll hold as long as the security remains above the 20-day moving average. I will sell all shares if the security drops below the 20-day moving average. I prefer breakout buys opposed to support buys. So if the portfolio is becoming too concentrated in support buys, I'll stop future support buys based on market conditions and wait for the market to improve before making any more trades. For example, right now the portfolio is exclusively made up of support buys, and the total investment value is 18% of the portfolio. If that number reaches 25 to 30%, I will become more restrictive on support buys and wait instead for bullish breakouts to start occurring. This is, after all, a momentum trading strategy. Now let's take a look at some of the price alert updates for my next trades. I'm going to start with the main indexes, QQQ, SPY, and DIA. Then I'll cover a couple of my favorite focused ETFs. Then I'll finish with some of my favorite individual stocks. For the indexes, QQQ price alert, low at 591 and high at 620. You look at the chart, I can see that in October it had a low of 590. So I'm using that, as well as there was also a bounce off of 590 twice in September. So I'm using 590 as the next level of support, or 591, right above 590 for QQQ. And then on the upside, above the 20-day moving average, I have it at 620. So if it goes above 620, then depending on how these indicators look, I may place a trade. Next, the SPY. I have an updated alert of 655 for the low and 678 for the high. So 655 is just above that low we saw in October. And on the high, 678 is just above the 20-day moving average. And last for the indexes is DIA, Dow Jones Industrial Average. I have a low at 455.45 and a high at 473. So if we jump over to that chart, you can see I'm using the low, that low that occurred in October, and on the high side will be above the 20-day moving average. Okay, so for the focused ETFs, I'm just going to go over some of them. We have Bitcoin Trust, GBTC, update alert at 65.65 for low and the high of 81. So if we jump over to GBTC, we can see the low is right at this support line that I created at around 65.65 here. And on the high side, it's above, right at the 20-day moving average. Okay, next, we'll go over GLD, since I just made a trade in that based on the 20, we're using the 20 as support for that trade. And so let's update that low alert Let's take a look here. 371. So this would actually be a stop loss alert. So right now the 20 is at 372.25 and the alert is just under that. And at that point, I may have to exit the trade on the downside just to limit the losses. But on the upside, I'm looking at an initial target of 388.18, and at that time, I will determine whether or not I want to take a little profit or hold and reset my alerts and stop losses and target profit alerts. Okay, so that's GLD. Next, I'm going to go over MAGs. Since I made a purchase in that, we're going to update MAGs, and this was a support level purchase. So the new support level is 61, and on the high side above the 20 is 66.75. So let's jump over to the chart for MAGs, and we'll see that 61 is right above the high that was set in August. So I'm looking for that to be a possible pivot point. May take a small position at 61 and then reevaluate the alerts at that point, unless it goes up from here and jumps over the 20, in which case I may initiate a breakout entry that goes above that if it's confirmed with some of the momentum indicators. Okay, next is the SMH, Semiconductors ETF. Let's jump over to that chart. And I set a low at 305. Let me confirm that. 303.33 and 353. So 303 is right above that high that was set in August. And it looks like it was used as a pivot point back in September. So I'm thinking it's possible that it could be used again if we see a pretty significant drop in the overall markets. So we'll see. And then on the high side, I have just over 353 and for a possible entry, depending on how the indicators look and the overall market. Next, we'll be looking at SVXY, which is the inverse of the VIX and volatility index. And I have an update alert here after making a support purchase of 43.13 for a low and a high of 49.19. So 43.13 is right there, right where we've seen a bounce before a couple times at that 43 level. We've also seen a breakdown below the 43 level. So this could be an opportunity to purchase on support. And then if we see a breakout above the 20, which would be right around that 49.34 level, I'll be looking at the indicators to confirm that this is a momentum move. So let's move on to the next one. We have XHB, which again was a support purchase. I have the next level support at 97.50 and with a possible high side of 105. So let's jump over to that chart. You can see my thinking here is we have a bounce off of 97.50 here, and it fell through, but then recaptured it, and then finally fell through and couldn't recapture the 97.50. It fell lower to about 85, 84.48. So right now I'm looking at 97.50 as the next level of support. And if it breaks above the 20, then I'm looking at around 105 for the entry. Next, we're looking at XLF. I'm going to skip a couple of names here, gloss over that the alerts here were updated to 109.50 and 114. XLE, I didn't change the alerts. They stayed the same. XLF, we have a new low alert at 50 and a high at 52.62. So for XLF, we are at a low of 50. So I'm thinking it may fall down to this level of possible support here where it's bounced a couple times So that would be below the 200-day. So I'm not sure if I'm going to actually make that purchase. We'll see. Or if it maybe uses the 200 as support and bounces above that 52.53 level, then may want to be involved in that with the purchase. Okay, so I'm just going to go over XLK as the last um, update for the focused ETFs, and then jump over to the individual stocks. So for XLK, and of course you can pause the screen if you wanted to take note of my price alerts for the other ETFs that I'm not going over right now. So these are the updated alerts that I made over the last, well, this morning. So for XLK, I have a new alert at 270.27 and a high at 294. So let's take a look at that chart, and we can see that I'm looking at the high that was set in August and also a breakout above that level in September. I'm thinking that could be if the market continues down, I'll be looking to make a small purchase at 270, and then I'll reevaluate at that time, unless it just bounces up from here, in which case I'll be looking at the 294, 293, 294 level for an entry. Okay, so for the individual stocks, I'm just going to cover a couple, and if you wanted to pause the screen to see the other updates that I made. But I'm going to start with Amazon. Apple, there was no change. So Amazon, I dropped the low to 215.15 and a high at 237. So Amazon. Okay, so we can see that it fell below that 234 level. I didn't make any purchase at that time because I was thinking it may go lower. And the next level of support I have is at 215. So if it does hit 215, I do think I will make a purchase there, a support level purchase. But if it does somehow find its way above the 20-day, then I have that as another possible entry. Okay, and then we have Meta. I'm going to skip ahead to Meta. I'm skipping Google, going to Meta. So the Meta, I have a low target of 560 and a high at 650. So if we jump over to their chart, you can see looking at 560 as a possible bounce, and on the high, looking at 650, which is just below the 20, but by the time it gets to that level, the 20 will be dropping, so I'll reevaluate at that time. Okay, Microsoft is the next. I'm going to go over Microsoft, Nvidia, Netflix, and Visa. For Microsoft, I've updated the alert. Since I made that support level purchase, I see the next level support at 470, and high above the 20 would be 514. So Microsoft, look at the chart real quick here. You can see 470, that possible bounce. And we pull up the history, 2 years history, you can see that the 468 was the actual high back in July of 2024. So that's the pivot point I'm looking for, which also happens to be above the 200-day moving average. So if we continue to see a fall, I would expect for a bounce at 470. So I'll be making a small purchase if it drops there. And on the high side, if it goes above the 20, I'll be making an entry there as long as the indicators confirm that. And then the final three, NVIDIA, Netflix, and Visa. So for NVIDIA, I definitely want to point out that they are reporting their earnings tonight after the close. So I'll be very interested to see what kind of movement occurs after the earnings call with any new information there. So I have a low still at the 170 level, but I've updated the high to 194, which is just above the 20 days. So if we jump over to NVIDIA, we can see if it jumps above, maybe there's some good news, or maybe they beat expectations. So if there's good news, I'd be looking at about 194 or higher. And on the downside, if there's some maybe a bad surprise, I'm looking around that 170 level as a possible entry. So we'll just see where it opens tomorrow. That could be a trade. We'll see. And last is, well, actually no, there's Netflix. I wanted to update that alert because of their stock split. So I've updated the price targets 107.50 on the low side and 114 on the high side. So we'll jump over there since they had a stock split. You can see what that looks like now. Okay, so instead of that 1075 level, it's now 107.50 as the support. And on the high side, I'm looking above the 200-day, but I'm not sure if I'm going to enter there. We'll just have to see how I feel about the market. So we'll take a look at that time. But I don't think I'll be rushing into Netflix if there is a signal. Okay, finally, let's talk about Visa. So Visa, um, and before I jump into Visa, you can pause the screen and look at the updates I've made for the other um, tickers, the other stocks. If you are interested in any of the stocks I didn't go over in this video, you can compare that to your notes if you like. But for Visa, I had an entry at 327 and an updated support level at 317.50. So let's jump over to Visa. You can see that support level at 317.50 with a possible high of 337. So 317.50. It's just below that 318 that it hit yesterday. So we'll see if it bounces back down. I'll be definitely taking a little bit more of Visa if the opportunity comes up, or I may just wait for it to break above the 20 and we'll see how the market is reacting at that time. In the last part of this video, let's take a look at the only closed trade so far for this portfolio and how that affects the overall portfolio. I sold GEV at 569 based on the break below the 20-day moving average. This resulted in a loss of $99, or about 2% for that trade. That brings the total realized loss for the portfolio to negative 0.2%. Not a great start, but considering the S&P 500 is currently down around 1.55% over the same period, not all is not lost. As we look at the chart of GE Vernova, you can see it is now testing my psychological strength. It appears there's another valid entry forming if the stock can close the day above the 20-day moving average, which raises the question, do I re-enter the trade or do I assume this price action is a trap and wait it out? This is a very important point that the trader must deal with on a regular basis. For me, in this particular case, I'm going to sit it out. This inevitably means that the stock will make new highs from here, and I will need to battle my FOMO emotions, fear of missing out, and not chase the stock if the price continues to rise. But when I take a step back and I look at the overall market, QQQ, SPY, DIA, and GBTC all look bearish over the short term. This leads me to believe this attempted rally for GEV may fail, if not today, possibly over the next few days. Even if that assessment ends up being wrong, it's based on my trading strategy, so that gives me the confidence I need to not chase this stock. If my assessment is wrong and we see everything start bouncing to the upside from here, I'll be ready to buy in other stocks when my triggers are hit, and there will be plenty of opportunities in other stocks, ETFs, and indexes at that time. My goal is to minimize my losses and hold my winners for as long as my emotions will allow me. If I can stay consistent with that over the long term, the market will reward me. If you like real trade breakdowns like this, subscribe so you don't miss next week's diary entry, and comment below what setups you're trading this month. I answer every question. Thanks for watching. Let's get rich together.